Hey, welcome to another episode of the Caroline Glick Mideast News Hour. This week, we're going to actually take a step away from the Middle East specifically and move to the United States and specifically to the Jewish American community, where we've seen over the years a mix of assimilation, growing apathy, and a tilt towards embracing progressive politics, which are increasingly inherently anti-Semitic and anti-Zionist inside of the United States by American Jews. I have here two really important Jewish American leaders, Charles Jacobs and Ralph Avi Goldwasser, who have been working for over 25 years on various human rights and American Jewish communal projects that have made them uniquely capable of explaining what the problem that the American Jewish community faces in trying to fight growing anti-Semitism in the United States, and also to preserve itself at a time when a growing number of Americans, particularly young Americans, are walking away from religion. I think that Jewish American young people are walking away from religion even faster than their non-Jewish cohorts. And so I think earlier this month, in early July, Charles Jacobs and Ralph Avi Goldwasser started the Jewish Leadership Project, which is an incredibly important project that's aimed at really challenging the Jewish leadership in the American Jewish community to stand up and face the growing challenges that the American Jewish community faces, both vis-a-vis anti-Semitism in the United States and also towards dissolution and assimilation of the community itself. So first of all, thank you, Charles, and thank you, Ralph, for joining me today on the program.
You can call me Avi.
Okay, I'll call you Avi. I'll call you Avi, Ralph. But okay, Avi. So Avi and Charles, can you guys just give me a little background about yourselves and how it is that over the years you've come to the conclusion that this new project, the leadership project, the Jewish Leadership Project, is so necessary, and what you hope to achieve here? So which one of you wants to take it away, and which one of you wants to add in?
Go ahead, Charles.
Okay, I'll start. So look, let's start with where we are. The Jewish community in America is under siege. We see Jews beaten in the streets of New York City. They're murdered in Pittsburgh and San Diego and Jersey City. They're stabbed in Boston. They're taken hostage in Texas. And they're harassed and bullied, as you know, on college campuses around the country. According to FBI data, Jews are twice as likely to be a victim of a hate crime as a Black person or a Muslim, and 10 times more likely to be a victim than an Asian person. So what's happening? So we have been working in the field for over 25 years, and we saw all of this mounting. And right now, there's a perfect storm. That is that 4 ideological camps are fomenting anti-Jewish bigotry and hatred. You have the white nationalists, you have Black nationalists, you have progressive anti-Zionists, and you have Islamists. And then you have the BDS movement, which is a great platform. Even though it doesn't win a lot of battles, it's a platform that gels and organizes and spreads the message against us. And then you have critical race theory, which is spreading throughout all of American public schools. And it is absolutely anti-Semitic. So and that theory paints Jews as white people, undeservedly privileged. And it's woke anti-Semitism, and it makes Jew hatred socially acceptable and even virtuous.
Are BDS, just to make clear, BDS and critical race theories, are they subsections of progressive anti-Semitism then? They're specifically progressive, or I can see BDS also falling under Islamic anti-Semitism, right?
Right, I mean—
And Black nationalist anti-Semitism.
Right. So you have the left Muslim alliance, right? You have the Red-Green alliance, and you have it in Europe, and that's what's chasing the Jews out of Europe.
Right.
So BDS is Palestinianist in origin, but it's helped. I mean, the left is laid down the drawbridge, and Palestinianism is marching into American institutions and taking them over in terms of ideological hegemony. So, and critical race theory, I think, is actually much more serious, because soon almost every American public school child is going to be learning that Jews are white or adjacent white, and they have undeserved privilege, and they're support. American Jews are supporting the racist, genocidal occupation forces in Israel, and so we're painted, tainted by Israel, and we're targeted. So all of this happened over a period of 25 years, and the Jewish leadership failed in every way to stop it. It failed to stop the media attacks. I remember when Andrea Levin and I started the Boston branch of CAMRA, Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting in America. We were asked to see if we could get Abe Foxman of the ADL to do this job instead, to be the media watchdog. Because why? Because he spoke with the voice of the Jewish people, and they told us that if we did this, we would just be one of a group of, we would be the right wing in a panoply of Jewish organizations. And that we said, yes, let Foxman do it. That would be great. It's important that America hears from the speakers of, that have validation to be leaders of the Jewish community. And he said no. And I would tell you that when he said no, and that, by the way, was the new anti-Semitism, that, painting Israel as the cruelest among nations is the new way to get Jews. That means that the top Jewish leadership didn't get it. And I would say that when he made that decision not to be the one to take that on, that was the beginning of the decline of Jewish power. And then we went to the campuses. We went, Avi and I were called.
But here you're ascribing the failure or the eclipse of Jewish, of the American Jewish community to decisions or to decisions made by the American Jewish community not to defend against liberal anti-Semitism as manifested at that time, among other places, in hostile media. And the question is, and I don't know whether it matters, but the question is it really because the Jews stood down, or is it because the phenomenon over time has grown in power and strength? Or are they intricately related and there is no chicken and no egg here? They're just both two sides of the same coin.
No, I think there was a chicken, and the chicken was Foxman at the ADL. I mean, there was
Really?
a point where he denied, he declined to do it. People asked him in the ADL. Israel is getting, I was reading the Boston Globe every day, and it's despicable. Just one example. A Palestinian is making a bomb, it blows up in his hands, and he's blinded. Headline in the Boston Globe: Israelis convict blind Palestinian. Right? I mean, you can't get worse than that. And it was on a daily basis.
Well, I don't know.
So
I've seen some that were actually even worse than that. Like when you had Tuvia Grossman, who was seeking shelter from a border policeman after he was beaten by a Muslim mob, an Arab mob in Jerusalem in 2000. And they claimed that in the New York Times that he was a Palestinian who had just been beaten by the border guard who was protecting him. So, I mean, the misrepresentations, the distortions, and the libels are so legion. Not to mention Netanyahu walking a dog that looks just like Donald Trump. Another infamous New York Times.
But when this all started in the late '80s, when it flowered, the Jewish community had a choice to make. Are we going to take this on as anti-Semitism, or are we not? Or are we going to say, well, there's two sides, and we're not going to be McCarthyites, etc. So they made that choice, and I think that choice was historically important and devastating to us.
Can I ask you one last question before I let you go on? I'm just curious. Another example that popped into my brain while you were talking was it Time magazine, when they were talking about Begin's rise in 1977, and they said Begin rhymes with Fagin. Remember that?
Yes.
So I'm wondering whether the changing of the guards in Israeli politics between the old Social Democrat Labor Party and the Likud Party, which was considered more far to the right, in 1977 had any impact on the Jewish community in the United States' willingness to defend Israel, or whether this was a separate issue completely.
I think that just helped what was already going.
Okay.
I think it helped a lot. Then this came onto the college campuses, and the professoriate became anti-Israel in a vicious way. And Avi and I went to Columbia University, where the students were calling for help, and got no help from the establishment. Hillel didn't help them. The Anti-Defamation League didn't help them. The federations didn't help them. And we went there and we found that professors were harassing, intimidating, and mocking Jewish students who denied what they said or who challenged them in class. And Avi made a film called Columbia Unbecoming.
This is already in the 2000s. This is, so you're sped up from the 1990s to the 2000s. In the 1990s, Abe Foxman refused to defend Israel in the media. And then in 2000, we started with the Palestinian terror war, right? And that was when you had the explosion.
So Avi, why don't you talk a little bit about Columbia? You were the filmmaker.
Yeah, well, I just want to step back a second. I think the real issue here is, why is Jewish leadership failing?
Mm-hmm.
And Jewish leadership has failed many times in history. This is just another time. My personal motivation in focusing on leadership really has to do with my family history. My father is a Holocaust survivor. He survived because he heard Jabotinsky speak in 1938. And as you know, Jewish leadership, both in Europe and America, failed during World War II. And from my point of view, I see a similar failure happening now. And the question is, why do we have failed leadership? And a lot of it has to do with the power structure in the Jewish community. Jewish leaders are not elected. They're anointed by donors. So the donor's choice is what we have. And sadly, these leaders are not held accountable for failure. They go on and on and on. And these leaders are working on multiple agendas. They're mostly liberal. They're loyal to the liberal cause, progressive cause. And they also try to balance that with their fiduciary responsibility to the community. And they will rationalize that whatever is progressive is really beneficial to the Jewish community. So in our experience, they were always conflicted between dual loyalties to the progressive cause and to their Jewish community. And therefore, they couldn't see, they refused to see. I mean, many of them are decent people. It was, to me, they were delusional. I mean, we came to them with evidence. Columbia Unbecoming was one example.
Mm-hmm.
We had testimonials by students. We went to them. They weren't excited. They wanted to sort of, it'll go away. The attitude has been, certainly from the Jews on campus, the professors, the Hillel, is don't give it too much attention, it'll go away. You know, it's an unwillingness to confront the problem, because these people are not fighters. They're social workers, they're academic. They don't want to fight. And the other side knows they don't want to fight. And that's why we've been losing. And Columbia Unbecoming was a great example. They refused to fight. They wished it away. It was just an isolated incident. Well, 20 years later, we know how worse it's gotten in Colombia.
I mean, it was terrible back then too. I mean, you had anti-Semitic riots in universities from coast to coast and throughout the United States. I mean, it's crazy that at that time they were already ignoring and denying and pretending that they could just sweep it under a rug.
So either they're cowards or they're delusional or both.
Well, maybe it's just that they don't care. Maybe they're apathetic.
Well, maybe they don't care. It's all possible. It's all combination of all these things. Okay, I can tell you though now, given what's happened in the last 20 years, I think they're concerned. They're concerned that whatever they've been doing hasn't worked. They have no vision what to do, but certainly they realize that things haven't worked out the way they expected. And that's a good thing. And I think from our point of view, after fighting the bad guys, as you wish, we concluded that we cannot win on campus without the backing of the full Jewish community, which comes back to leadership. And as you know, leadership is the most important thing for any organization, any group of people. All right? It's all about leadership. And if we don't have good leadership, we're going to lose. And we don't have good leadership in America, and we're losing. And it's a matter of getting the donors who control the leaders to recognize that their anointed leaders are failing, and therefore they are failing, and they have to take responsibility for that and hold themselves accountable for the failure.
So is your purpose then with the Jewish Leadership Project to try to force a change in the behavior of the Jewish Federations of North America and AIPAC and the ADL? Or are you
Well,
trying to supplant them? How do you see
no.
this?
We're not trying to supplant them. We're not starting a new organization to compete with ADL. What we're trying to do, first stage, is to educate the Jewish public that their leaders have betrayed them and failed them. Not for bad intentions. They're just incompetent or they're clueless. They don't get it. They really don't get it. We've had conversation with leaders, and it's shocking how they don't get it or they don't want to get it. Because if they saw reality, they may have to do something that isn't pleasant. That may cause them some pain.
I think that really, though, has been the thread that has connected all the failures of the American Jewish community over time. I mean, you talked about the European Jewish community, but I mean, if you read Raphael Madoff's books on Stephen Weiss and the failure of the American Jewish community during the Shoah, and then moving forward, it really, the sense, at least that I took from his biography of Stephen Weiss, among other things, was that Weiss just didn't care that much. I mean, he was much more interested in retaining his access to the Roosevelt White House and to being the court Jew for Roosevelt than he was in doing anything concrete to save European Jewry. And you know, part of that was also that the Jews in the United States were relatively weaker than they were after the war, and they were worried about discrimination. There was an enormous amount of support in the United States for the Nazis at the start of the war, and a lot of people, even during the war, were blaming it on the Jews. And anti-Semitism in the United States was much more open. You had people like Father Coughlin, you know, who was speaking to millions and millions of Americans. So part of it, on the part of the, you know, the upper crust American Jewish leaders, first and foremost, Stephen Weiss, they weren't interested in rocking the boat because they liked being Roosevelt's Jew or Jews.
That same dynamic is being replicated all across America. And we have grassroots activists around the country telling us and writing that they see bad things happening in the schools, and they go to the JCRCs, the Jewish Community Relations Councils, or the federations or the ADLs, and they tell them what's happening, and they're told, we'll take care of it. We do this behind the scenes. We have good relationships with the people in power. Don't do anything. And that's similar.
Yeah, but look, I mean, it comes back to what is leadership. It's not a perk. It's a burden. And either you act like a leader or you get out. So Rabbi Weiss was trying to balance a lot of things. He was concerned about backlash against Jews, but he's a leader. You got to take the pain. And he
wasn't willing to take any pain at all.
Exactly.
And that really goes, you say what leadership is in the ideal, but the fact is that you have these hidebound organizations that have been led by the same people for decades who groomed no successors. You know, just look at the ADL and Jonathan Greenblatt. And, you know, Abe Foxman was at retirement age well before he retired, if I'm not mistaken. And there was nobody on hand to take over who was going to continue on with the mission of the ADL, for better or for worse, as he had carried it out. And you see this in organizations all over, so that, yeah, and you look at their 6- and 7-figure salaries, and you understand why they're in no hurry to vacate their post. And, you know, that they see their job first and foremost as maintaining their very close relations with their boards and with their donors, so that they can keep getting the perks of leadership and the status of leader without actually doing anything to protect the community. So, I mean, it's very difficult as a practical matter to get better leaders when you have the failed leaders who just never leave their jobs.
Well, the problem is of the board of trustees and the donors who don't hold these leaders accountable. They get away with this. All right. There's no accountability. Nobody gets fired. And you're right about Abe Foxman. He stayed for too long. And the board and Abe failed to have a succession plan. All right. And whatever they were thinking, obviously, they may have some regrets today, or maybe they don't. Because basically, these are conflict-averse people who are more concerned with the social status. And if they get a nice pension, they want to make it last as long. I want to see people being fired for failing.
Okay, so let's go to that for a second, because I think, you know, we can talk the entire hour about the failure. But I think that there are two things that we should talk about more helpfully for your project and what you guys want to accomplish, and also for the well-being of the American Jewish community. And one is to talk about not only the forms of anti-Semitism, but why the failure, and then talk about how the Jewish Leadership Project can play a key role in changing things for the better, because I think those are the two things that people really have to understand, just how bad the situation has become, and what it is in your initiative that can really, if not be an antidote, at least, move people away from where they are today and towards something that's going to be better in terms of preserving the community and securing Jews in America.
Well, you're right that they don't understand how bad things are. They respond to individual incidents, but they have no understanding, because the only person at all, we should make an exception, is Mort Klein, who's been the only one who actually says what is and has the courage to criticize the failed leaders. But apart from him, they don't hear, the Jewish community doesn't understand where left-wing anti-Semitism comes from. I mean, the community leaders like to go after the right, the white racists, the neo-Nazis, because why? That's easy to do. There's no pushback. There's nobody inside the big tent who's going to say you shouldn't do that. But they fail to go after and explain the nature and extent of left-wing anti-Semitism. They have completely failed to talk to the Jews about the dangers of Islamism and the infiltration into American society of radical Muslims who seek to radicalize the historically moderate Muslim community that had been here for decades. And of course, they don't want to talk about Black anti-Semitism. They're terrified of Farrakhan. Here you've got somebody who is, we show people in our podcasts, in our workshops, speeches by Farrakhaners that would just make you scream, explode about. I mean, it's like it could be Nazi, except that we're whites, and that's it got reversed. So the first thing is to explain to the Jewish community what is the nature of the new anti-Semitism. They don't know, they don't understand it, and then is how and why the Jewish community leadership is failing. And let's pressure them, let's push them to change.
It's not just that they're failing. I mean, there are some Jewish leaders that are failing. You can look at AIPAC and see that, for election cycle after election cycle after election cycle, to try to keep up this guise of bipartisanism, all they would do is water down and water down and water down all of their initiatives in order to get some Democrat buy-in. And then at the end, they started alienating Republicans. I know several Republican senators don't want to have anything to do with AIPAC because they're not really pro-Israel. And on the other hand, now, and the J Street challenge to J Street, I mean to AIPAC was that, which is another movie that you guys put out. The J Street challenge, though, to AIPAC was they said they demonized AIPAC as a Republican organization because AIPAC supports people in both parties, and instead of standing up for itself, AIPAC tried to go further to the left to show that J Street's criticism was wrong on its merits, as opposed to being illegitimate, completely, and appalling. And now you have these and now finally, AIPAC is beginning to wake up. They started their own. They did start to wake up, as you said. They opened up a new PAC that is getting involved with congressional primaries, Democrat primaries. But it's amazing. I opened up on my phone this article from the Jewish Insider, where they were talking about these key races that pit progressive Democrats, would-be squad members, against more traditional leftist Democrats that are not anti-Zionist. And the principal donors to the ones who aren't particularly anti-Zionist or maybe pro-Israel in a loosey-goosey kind of way, they're being overwhelmingly supported by Ken Melman's group, the Democrat Majority for Israel, and the AIPAC PAC. And on the other hand, the anti-Israel squad members, would-be squad members, are being supported to the tune of millions of dollars by J Street's PAC. So that it's amazing now that the battle has been joined, But it's extraordinary that the Jewish organization JPAC is leading the fight to get anti-Israel, anti-Semitic members elected to the Congress against the Jews. And there are two Jews, Andy Levin from Michigan, who is being supported by AIPAC by J Street and AIPAC, and the other one are supporting the non-Jew. And it's the same thing with Jerry Nadler's race against Carol Maloney in New York. So, and Jerry Nadler is saying, vote for me, otherwise there won't be any Jews left in New York's congressional delegation. And Carol Maloney is saying, vote for me because I'm actually pro-Israel. So it's really amazing the central role that these Jewish institutions that have been taken over by the left or founded by the left are the ones who are at the lead of the anti-Israel, anti-American Jewish communal efforts to harm the community and to harm American.
Well, the J Street story is really important. In the beginning, there was a fight in all the JCRCs. What's the red line? Who are you not going to let into Jewish communal life? Right? And those of us who argued against J Street argued that those people who blame Israel for the conflict, what is, after all, the new anti-Semitism? It is that Israel is at fault for needlessly oppressing this darker-skinned, indigent, indigenous group of people. And if you're going to have that point of view and you're going to bring it inside the tent, you're going to corrupt and rot the apple from the inside. And that's what they did. We made the film. Avi was the producer of the film of the J Street Challenge. And we showed it to people around the country. We went to Howard Core of AIPAC, and we said, they're eating your lunch. Why don't you help get this film out? And the film got rave reviews. It was very good. And he didn't want to do it. And he didn't want to do it because he had a left-wing guy leading his campus effort who said, let's not do this. So,
look, I think we can spend a lot of time describing the dysfunctional nature of Jewish leadership, and the examples you gave, Caroline and Charles. There's so many. And the question is, what do we do about it? We know they're dysfunctional.
So what do you do about it? How does the Jewish Leadership Project, how does it view this? How does it view dealing with this challenge, which it seems, like you said, Charles, AIPAC couldn't find J Street because they had J Streeters inside of AIPAC who blocked AIPAC from fighting J Street. Essentially, that's what it is, right? Which was the whole point. That was the pernicious aspect of J Street's assault on AIPAC, which was that AIPAC was in no position whatsoever to defend itself. It couldn't.
Look, it all comes down to lack of understanding, lack of strategic thinking on the part of AIPAC. We had discussions. We begged them to fight J Street. They didn't think it was worth fighting, okay? But that's true about Jewish leadership in other areas. Well, look, we're a small organization. It's a grassroots, it's a startup. We are mobilizing local activists to challenge their local leadership. We're not taking on AIPAC or ADL. We're going to take the local rabbi, the local federation. It's much easier to pressure them. And the way to get to them to change is to get to their donors. They all serve at the pleasure of the donors. So we need to get to the donors. We need to educate the donors. We need to educate the community to put pressure on the donors to take action and hold leadership accountable.
Do you have any case studies where this kind of thing worked?
Yes, we had one place where the activists were successful in educating the donor. The donors are not stupid, all right? They may be—
They care? By and large, are the donors—
they care to some extent. The question is, what do they care more about, the social status or the Jewish community? Well, we need to make them care. We need to figure out what will make them care. And we know that when it comes to Jews, shaming is a powerful thing. As long as the donors are unknown, nobody knows about them, they're the ones pulling the strings, they're not going to do things. When we did Columbia Unbecoming, Caroline, we learned one lesson, that despite all the evidence that we brought to the Columbia trustees, the Columbia president, the provost, that didn't move them. Logic, facts, reason, decency didn't motivate them. The only thing that motivated them is pain. When we had a news conference and the newspaper started writing about Colombia. That's when they removed. We know that pain motivates people, not decency or logic. So unless the people in power get pain or shamed into acting, they're not going to change.
And we think that the Jewish community is ripe for this. You know, for the longest time, there's so many people who don't want to go out in public and criticize other Jewish leaders because, you know, they're at the local level. These were the rabbis, you know, who sat shiva with me, who did the bris on my kid. And how am I going to say?
Oh, you went muted, Charles. You just muted yourself.
I did.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're okay.
Oh, wow. I said that I think the Jewish community is ripe for this because for the longest time, it's been difficult to get Jews who think like we do. And I think there's a large amount of Jews who think like we do, not only about the external threats, but about the failure of leadership. It's hard for Jews to criticize their own leaders because at a local level, they're friends, they're rabbis. Even though your rabbi is not doing his job and telling the congregations about what's going on campus, it's maybe difficult for you to criticize him in public. He, after all, is your friend. He came to sit shiva with you. He might have done the bris. It's a very difficult thing. But absolutely. I do think that this is a unique effort. There are no other groups that I know of who are saying it's time now to take on the failure of Jewish leadership. And I think that we'll do quite well. Already, we've been in the press a little bit, and the response has been, "It's about time somebody said this. Why haven't people said this before?" So I think that it's time. I mean, after all,
I agree that it's time. I'll just throw another one at you, which is, you know, I mean, there's a huge problem now in the conservative and reform movements, and I'd assume the Reconstructionists, although I don't think figure on the Pew survey. And when you look at the numbers, whether it's in the 2013 or the 2020 Pew survey of American Jewish life, you see that both movements are essentially hemorrhaging members, and they're watering down the criterion for membership. And then by doing that, and particularly in the reform and letting in non-Jewish spouses to be presidents of shoals and things like that, then it just becomes all the worse. So that when they water down the religious meaning to nothing, to whatever the lowest common denominator is, when lowest may be underneath the floorboards, they replace it with progressivism, wokeness, J Street-like social action, and there's no end to funding for organizations like Bend the Arc and others that are going to go into these dying communities and transform them into, you know, Marxist action groups. And so most, or I wouldn't say most because I have no idea, but a lot of normal people, normal Jews who are committed Jews who have been in conservative and reform congregations for decades are just leaving, and they're either leaving the community or they're going to the Chabad, but they're not starting new synagogues, because the truth is, in a lot of these communities, they're a very tiny minority, 10%, 15% of their community that says enough is enough, we can't do this.
And we haven't even seen what's going to happen if COVID ever stops, because what there 15 or 1,800 reform and conservative shuls in America. Most of them, if not all of them, closed for COVID. I mean, we're talking to rabbis who are shivering, thinking what's going to happen when we try to reopen? Is anybody going to come back? And it has a lot to do with their failure to defend the Jewish peoplehood and Israel. And it has a lot to do with, I think, a threshold of intensity in Jewish life, which many of them don't reach. They've all become tikkunistas. I mean, that's the new, they've traded Judaism in for socialism under the banner of tikkun olam, the false banner of.
Oh, no, I know. And we have a very bizarre phenomenon here, which in Israel, which is that the heads of leftist parties like Yesh Atid leader, caretaker Prime Minister Yair Lapid, Merav Michaeli, the head of the very post-Zionist Labor Party, they're latching on to the reform and conservative movements and trying to empower them in Israel. And suddenly, for the first time, we're seeing government documents with concepts of tikkun olam appearing in them. The diaspora ministry was supposed to be helping American Jews and other diasporas not assimilate, and instead what they're doing is they're being used as an organ to try to expand the power of the conservative and reform movements inside of Israel. So, it's a very strange phenomenon that we're seeing. But I mean, just to go back for a second to your thing. So you have a community that is fragmented and apathetic, whose leaders are now being overtaken by activist groups that are well-funded, that are on the far left. And they're moving in that direction in the hope of reaching a new common denominator. And you think that under the circumstances, shaming the leadership is going to make them do something else?
Well, look, it's been any time
think-
in Jewish history where anti-Semitism rises, you get a lot of people running away, but then you get some people who become steeled to it.
Right.
And I think that Jewish community is extraordinarily talented. It's got a lot of brave people, but they're not organized to take this on. All the good people so far have been doing the work of sticking their fingers in the dike, right? They work with camera against the media. They work with other people on campuses. They're fighting the external fight. Those people also need to now begin to think about, can we win that only doing that without changing leadership? And I think the time has come that they will think that.
I think that you're probably right, because I think, I mean, you look at the levels of insecurity of the American Jews in terms of fear of anti-Semitism. I don't know whether it's been higher in the past, but it certainly hasn't been higher in the past 50 years, right?
Well, 40% of Jews now do something that hides their Jewish identity, either not wearing Jewish clothing, identified clothing, or not going online and posting in Jewish things, or not going to Jewish events. So that fear is there. 90% of Jews think that anti-Semitism is a problem.
I think that the fear is there. Even the most progressive Jews I know are getting to be very uncomfortable. And I think they recognize that Jewish leadership is not effective in fighting against the hostility toward the community. They recognize that, all right? And I think that's the opening here. They don't know what the answer is, but they know there's a problem. They're not comfortable. They could, for a while, pretend there's no problem, go back to playing golf in the stock market. But I think things are getting to the point where they're getting uncomfortable, and that's good. And we're trying to mobilize young Jews to understand that their future is being jeopardized by these failed leaders. They have the most at stake here.
So can you give me some examples of the kinds of things that you're doing? I mean, you guys have been involved with this.
Well,
so you made the two films, which were extremely important, the J Street Challenge and Columbia Unbecoming. So you're going to do more films? Or are you going to have you done more on what's the grassroots level activism going to look like?
Yeah, what we're trying to do is mobilize local people, because it's got to be a local campaign, and educate them to train their community about the failure of Jewish leadership, to put pressure on Jewish leadership when they're exposed as being a failure. We hired a young woman who will help us organize young people who have the biggest stake in the future. It's like the Greta Thunberg telling, how dare do you jeopardize my future? I mean, if you're a young Jew today, you look at the trend, you should be worried if you understand what's going on. And therefore, we think that there's, by the way, I got to tell you, we spoke to many people. For whatever reason, it's mostly young women. They are active and willing to fight, having difficulties finding young men. Some amazing.
Well, I think men are being so silenced and kowtowed by the critical race theory and the anti-toxic masculinity and all of the rest of it that it's possible that they're too.
Okay, we'll get the women. That's okay.
But I was just going to say, for instance, I remember several years ago, a woman named Sloan Rathmuth, who I think you probably know. She was a parent in North Carolina,
right.
I think in Durham. And she was sending her kids to a Jewish day school there, and she discovered that the teachers there were BDS activists. And I think it was actually in 2014 during caste-led operation, the Hamas-Israel war in 2014, that the teachers at her Jewish day school were teaching the children that Israel was a criminal Nazi state. And she tried to do something about it, but you see that the people who are going into rabbinical school, you see that the people who are teaching Hebrew school, the people who are becoming Jewish professionals are increasingly woke and antithetic and antagonistic to Judaism, and they're the ones that are now taking leadership roles in the Jewish community, which is a disaster
so
of Soviet proportions. You know,
that's the situation. Now the question is, what do we do about it? It's all true.
so what could you do if Sloan came to you today and said, "Look, we have these woke teachers at our Jewish day school. How can you help me?"
We need to launch a campaign to identify who has the power in those schools. Okay, who are the donors, the leaders, and they need to be exposed for what they're doing. All right. I mean, all we can do is educate people and hope that they will shame them to do the right thing. There's a problem in Jewish schools, absolutely. Okay, it's not well publicized. Okay, because the leaders don't talk about it. All right, it's step by step. The other side has been very clever. Okay, like the left, they're marching through the institutions. We're asleep. Our leaders are asleep. They don't want to create any waves. Well, we have to hold them accountable to that. It's not easy, but it's case by case on a local basis. It's much easier to get rid of a local rabbi than to get rid of the head of ADL.
How do you compare when I think about the penetration of Jewish organizations by anti-Semitic Jews who want to advance an anti-Jewish agenda inside of Jewish institutions, it really does remind me of the situation in the Soviet Union, where you had, what was it called in Russian, the Jewish section of the
Nevsektia.
The Nevsektia, whose job it was to destroy yeshiva life in the early days of the Soviet Union and destroy the rabbis and all the rest of it, the Jewish institutional structure inside of Russia and the Soviet Union. And it's really a miracle that 70 years later, you still had what were called the Jews of silence, who were so oppressed by the Soviet authorities as Jews, and everything was done to prevent them from being Jewish. And how similar do you think, when you look at the Nevskeksia and you look at the Jewish leadership today, or the Jewish activists today that are promoting an anti-Jewish agenda, how similar do you think that they are? And what do you think explains, if you have an explanation, and if not, we can leave it, but the fact that the Soviet Jews were able to survive as Jews? Because right now it looks like the American Jews are less successful.
Look, I think it's the same playbook by the same ideologues. And the sad thing is that the establishment is not aware, is clueless, a reluctant fight, too cowardly, and it's happening. We're watching it step by step. But it's not well publicized.
Look, what we're doing is new and unique. People have a sense that the Jewish leadership is failing, but we're going to make it a topic of conversation. Okay. We're going to make it a discussion point. We just edited an edition of White Rose magazine where we collected 13 essays of very good people: Jonathan Tobin, William Jacobson, Thane Rosenbaum. And we're going to make that into a book where we've collected people who very, very articulately explain either the failure of the analysis of why this is happening psychologically, sociologically, organizationally, and also people giving concrete examples of their own fights that are being undermined by their local JCRCs.
Very important.
So I think here the headline here is, no one else is doing this. Right. No one else is saying, let's all get together and say out loud, our house is on fire and they're doing business as usual. That has to stop.
And in fact, one of our first demands is to ask Jewish leaders in local communities to understand that we're under assault, we're under threat. And if they understand that, they have to declare a state of emergency. and reprioritize whatever initiatives they have to focus on protecting the Jewish community. If they don't do that, they're not serious. They don't get it. They can
No.
keep working on refugees and trends and everybody else. They have to focus on the threat to the community.
But that's really, isn't it, that, I mean, there are two challenges, and I guess I keep going back and forth in my questioning about them, because one of them is the assimilation and the other one is the threat. Because the assimilationist trend is very strong. I just read another article today about Jewish organizations that are taking the Jewish out of their names. We saw with Hias, and we're seeing, they were talking, it was an article about organizations in Los Angeles that the Jewish Vocational Service is now calling itself something else, taking Jew out of it. The Jewish old age home is taking out the Jew in their name, and it's really and part of it is maybe because they don't want to be part of a Boston mapping project in LA, but part of it is also, perhaps, which was actually a really incredible thing. And I don't think it's going to be the last. I think it was the shot across the bow, and you're going to have more of that, because there's always more of that. After something shocking happens for the first time, the second time it happens, it's less shocking. And the third time it happens, it becomes common practice. But the Jews' response to this is to hide the fact that they're Jews. It's not just the 40% of American Jews who are hiding, they're taking action to not identify as Jews. It's also Jewish organizations that are now taking action to not identify as Jews. So that's one problem, which is that the Jews just want to check out. They don't want to deal with this. They don't want any confrontation whatsoever. And the other problem is, you do have, and I think the Tikva Fund has tried to fill the vacuum for the Jews, the million or so Jews who are committed Jews, who want to remain committed Jews, who are very pro-Israel, who are committed to maintaining their Jewish identity in the United States. And maybe it's just organizing them. The question here, I guess, really is, and it goes back to this, and I'm sorry that I keep banging it because I just inevitably kept coming back to it, which is, are you fighting windmills? Or should you be building organizations for the Jews who actually care, who are actually already in the fight and need to know about other people, need to feel solidarity, need to feel that they're not alone, need to understand that they're part of a movement of American Jews that are standing up for themselves as Jews.
Well, to the windmill thing, I'm sitting here in Jerusalem, and I've met with friends of mine that I've known for a long time who have been spending their entire lives trying to build up American Jewry. And I'm shocked. They're more pessimistic than I am. They're giving up. They're saying the only people going to be left are the Orthodox. I don't believe that. I think, as I said before, when things really get bad for Jews, a lot of them run away. We know that. A lot of them hide. A lot of them just are cowards and and this universalistic way of tikkun olam is a way to do that. But a lot of them will buck up and will feel the call of history and the call of nationhood and peoplehood and justice, and they will be strong. And so our job is not to do what Tikva is doing. Tikva is doing the best, I think. It's magnificent what they're doing. Our job is to ring the bell and tell the rest of the Jews, watch out. This is really coming down upon you and you're not protected. So let's think about something to do. So I think in that way we can build a strong community. It's not going to be a majority right now, but it's going to be a strong counter to the failed leaders.
And do you have anything to add to that, Avi?
Well, I think we're a small organization. I think what we're trying to do is educate the public. Hopefully leaders will emerge from that effort. Hopefully there'll be some movement. Hopefully, because it's decentralized, different communities will try different things. And if something's successful, it can be adapted elsewhere. We have a success story in Providence, Rhode Island, and there'll be others. But that's what it is. It's a grassroots effort. We don't have millions of dollars. We don't have thousands of people. But we think that time will prove us right. I think that things will get worse and people will connect the dots. My own father heard Jabotinsky tell him to leave, but it's just one person's opinion. He didn't do anything. But the Nazis came, he connected the dots. But because he heard Jabotinsky, he could connect the dots. And the point here is that we'll educate the public, and at some point they'll connect the dots. And things are happening fast enough for them to re-examine their assumptions and how much confidence they have in Jewish leaders who are paid to protect them.
It's really amazing that when we were growing up in the 1970s and the 1980s, you just took for granted that the Jewish leadership was there and that they were on it, you know. I mean, that was the assumption that we grew up with, was that even the Pritzker family owned Braniff Airline. And I remember my mother saying to me, you know, the Pritzkers have Braniff. If everything ever goes bad, you know, we'll be able to run away, because the idea was that the Pritzkers had so much money and that they were gonna use it for the community, to save the community if push came to shove. And I don't think that there's any sense of that anymore. You know, I mean, now you have Tablet Magazine just came out with this thing that said the Pritzker family is now devoting its efforts to advancing transgenderism in the United States.
Yes, they want to play in a bigger field. The Jewish community is too small for them. They want to be world leaders, and therefore they're not as interested in parochial issues like the Jewish community. They abandoned the Jewish community.
And
So
Caroline, when you and I grew up in the States, we didn't have to have security in every synagogue.
No.
This is a vast change, the shocking vast change. Imagine going to shul with a cop outside. It's almost like Europe, getting to be like Europe. So I think that these realities are going to impinge upon the consciousness, however deadened it is and however misled they've been so far.
But you point about the Pritzkers, it's a wonderful example of what happens to rich Jews who used to support the community and now want to support a universalist community and are less concerned with protecting the Jews. And that's the danger that we face.
So so I hope that I'm able to make your deadline and submit my chapter for your book, but I'm
going to hold you to it.
Okay, well, I have a couple of very happy family simchas in the next couple of weeks, so I'm a little bit depressed, but I will do my best. At any rate, guys, I mean, so the point though is that, you know, you're putting out this collection of essays. You have the White Rose. How does it go? whiterose.com, or what is the website?
White Rose Magazine. Just Google White Rose Magazine.
White Rose Magazine.
And also we have a website, a new website, thejewishleadershipproject.org, and you can see all of our work there. And a way to join.
Okay, and you guys are basically your purpose is to serve as almost as a clearinghouse of ideas for people who are involved. Well, this worked in New Haven, Connecticut, maybe it can work in your community, or how can you adapt this model, or what can we do in order to help you guys put together a strategy so that you'll be working with local Jews who are seeing things like JVP members infiltrating their Hebrew schools and their day schools, and you can put together with them. You're going to be helping these local activists put together a plan for actually fighting back, right? Exactly. That's the idea.
Exactly. Yep. Yes.
Well, guys, I think that this is a really important initiative. I think it's very important because people do feel isolated, and they are isolated in a lot of cases. And parents, I mean, we even saw just with the general population in the United States about, you know, parents were afraid to say, we cannot continue to have our children mistreated in the way they're being mistreated during the COVID period. And people are just afraid to speak out because of the intellectual and social terror that the leftist revolutionaries.
But there's a counter movement to that. You know, the parents are not any longer afraid to speak out. They're the ones storming the barricades. Actually, it's quite wonderful to see. And
it's amazing, and we need to have something like that among Jewish Americans as well, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's not, of course, only against the Jewish institution. So that's the other aspect to it. It's also against the critical race theory people. I mean, you were going after it in Newton, Massachusetts, like 15, 20 years ago, when this first started appearing in public school curricula,
and we could have won had it not been for the betrayal of the Jewish leadership, which kept falsely assuring people that everything was but basically okay. We'll take care of it behind the scenes, etc.
So here's a good example. So just explain what happened in Newton and say what do you think that the Jewish Leadership Project could do against what you guys walked into?
Right. So what happened in Newton? It started about 11 years ago when Jewish parents came to us and said, they're teaching my kids that Israelis are murdering Palestinian and women in jail, in Israeli jails. And it came from the Arab World Studies notebook, which everybody knew was a Saudi-funded notebook that got smuggled into the curriculum from Harvard University, by the way. And then we had to get FOIA's, Freedom of Information Act, to figure out what else. They wouldn't tell us what else was in the curriculum, and we pulled it out of them. And they gave, for example, as a primary source, the Hamas charter that they doctored. So the Hamas charter says every Jew in the world has to be killed. And the doctored one said the Zionists, not the Jews, right? So it wasn't a genocidal movement. It was
just Jews like us.
Yeah, just Jews, like just the bad Jews, just the bad Jews. And then they had, it was just, they had a map that was done by the PLO, but they erased the fact that it was done by the PLO to make it look like a legitimate map, and more and more and more. And we went to the school committee and we testified, but the JCRC and the Jewish Federation told the mayor that we were exaggerating and that they could handle it. And that's the reason it never got handled. Yes, we got rid of the Arab World Studies notebook, and that was a big thing. And what should they have done? They should have organized to investigate, how is this happening? Is this happening only in Newton, Massachusetts? That's not possible. Avi did a small film about a group called Primary Source, whose job is to implant these things in teacher trainings. And that's how smart the other side is. And if you ask the Jewish community, well, what's your strategy? What are you going to do about this? Nothing whatsoever. So if you ask me now, I would say we can't win without them. If they're going to go and tell the mayor, we're the Jews, I'm the head of the Federation, and I can tell you there's not a problem, mayor, and that these people are exaggerating and they're radicals, how can you win? So we have to win that fight. We have to win that fight against the failed Jewish leaders, or else we're not going to win.
And throughout the years when you've been fighting the Jewish leadership, have they ever sat down and said, well, can you help us figure out how to do it? Or at what levels have you heard those kinds of questions and had those kinds of discussions?
From time to time, you get a friendly, and it's important. And we have given them ideas, and we have given them information. For example, about the mosque, the radical mosque in Boston. We knew more than anybody. We wrote a book about it, but they didn't want to fight. They gave up, and they're actually putting a kosher stamp on the most radical Muslim elements in the country. But from time to time, they listened to us, and from time to time, they did some things, but they haven't found. They're stuck. They're paralyzed. They're like deer in the headlights. The train is coming, and they're stuck. They're fighting the old war. They're fighting the Nazis. They're thinking that if we ally with other victim groups, we'll be one of the victim groups, and therefore we'll have an alliance with them against the right. Well, that might have been, 20 years ago, but progressivism, wokeism is eating classical liberalism's lunch. And you can, and these people haven't thought that through. They don't know what to do. That's the danger. They really don't know what to do. Even if they wanted to do something better than they're doing, they don't know what to do. So we are trying to talk to them. We have back channels to them. Like, we do talk to them. But for them to pivot, wow, hard. I'm terribly afraid that it'll take more Jewish blood in the streets for this. As Avi says all the time, it's not logic, reason, data, facts that moves people. It's emotion. So we're just trying to move the curve faster. We're trying to advance the learning curve quicker than just by events.
Well, I have to wish you the best of luck. I think the situation really is dire. It's dire, and I think one of the problems is that the American Jewish community can't understand that it's been eclipsed. It's been eclipsed in the Jewish world by Israel. It's been eclipsed, which is a good thing, it's been eclipsed in American politics by the woke revolution that's overtaking all of the institutions that they identified with. And and they're being overtaken by their own assimilationism. And I think that, the people who want to stand up, the good Jewish people in the United States who want to maintain the Jewish community and want to be strong and have a voice in America, that they have to really work together. And I think that the Jewish Leadership Project is, you have to be applauded for trying, because I think it's really important not to give up the good fight. So, any parting words that you want to give wisdom before we move on?
Well, the Jewish community has faced terrible situations in the past, worse than this. The Jewish community has within it talented, creative, brave people, and we need to rally them. And this is, by the way, this is where the action is going to be. This fight here about the failure of Jewish leadership, I think, is going to be where the news is going to be, where the action is going to be, where the fights are going to be. So stay tuned.
Okay, Avi?
The other point I would make is that nothing is impossible. I've been in a dozen startups. They're all acts of faith. There's no guarantees. There's no guarantees that we'll succeed here. But persistence is important, and we're going to keep fighting as long as we can. And hopefully something will come out. But we're going to keep on fighting, and we need to get other Jews to join the fight, to recognize that their future, the future of their children and grandchildren, is at stake here. They cannot be passive, be on the sideline.
I couldn't agree more. I've never seen things this bad in America, and I've never seen things this bad in the American Jewish community. And you're absolutely right. I mean, I think that you can't afford not to fight, because everything is at stake, whether you're fighting the woke revolutionaries in a Jewish context or in a non-Jewish context. The future of freedom in the United States, the future of freedom in the land of the free and the home of the brave, that's what is in the crosshairs right now. And the Jews, as you said, are the canary in the mine shaft. And what happens to the Jews never ends with the Jews, as Robert Wistrich said, the late Robert Wistrich. And we have to just make sure that there are Jewish voices that are crying out and fighting this. And I think that you're giving people a mechanism to fight it together. So I congratulate both of you on the initiative. And obviously I'm here to get your voice out as far as I can. And there are a lot of good people in this fight. It's all of our fight, and we all have to fight it together. So thank you guys very much. And we'll see you again next week for another episode of the Mideast News Hour. And just don't lose faith. It'll get us much, much further than we thought it would. So thanks very much. Take care.
Thank you, Karen.